Today, I want to talk about something that, it's talked about sometimes, but I don't think that it's ever really talked about enough. And I think it's going to be like, why is Bloodlust mandatory in dungeons? Why are you seeing compositions and players reroll into comps that sometimes would be deemed less efficient just to make sure that they have Bloodlust coverage in some situations? And we're going to talk about like historical data. We're also going to talk about how like battle res kind of went through a similar iterative process, and I think that the good way of starting with this is like talking about like Legion just in general. Legion went through a similar iterative process with like battle res, where early on. So first off, in Legion, battle reses were unique to like the character. Then that got changed to like a global battle res thing. That was a good change to make sure that you wouldn't only bring battle res classes. There was no form of engineering battle res or external way to get battle res onto players. And so, I mean, like if you're looking at this data from Legion, the last season of Legion, everybody's playing a DK, everybody's playing a Druid, everybody's playing a Warlock. You have all three of these battle res classes and compositions. If you even look at the MDI from that season, basically everybody has B-res coverage inside of their tank. Obviously Blood DK was good, but even if you look at the seasons prior to that, so if you look at the season before Blood DK was an absolute god, I mean, you still had some people playing Blood because it was still good, but even still you had B-res coverage in pretty much every single composition. Then the engineering battle res was introduced in Legion, and that changed things where players were a little bit more willing to run no battle res comps. Druid was still fairly solid in the meta, so I don't think it's really fair to say that the meta fully made this leap into like, all right, we're not running B-res comps. But there was like a couple of seasons of BFA where no B-res compositions were in the meta, and that was like BFA season 4, where you fairly regularly played like no B-res comps. If you look at the top 20 players, none of them have a battle res, right, of any capacity. So they're all relying on engineering battle res in some capacity. And I mean, like once you start clicking further, you get more druids and stuff like that, and you have other players that are playing like Resta Druid and stuff like that. So Resta was still good, but it's not like everybody was regularly playing with like a B-res comp or something like that. And so I think that from here, I mean, we're seeing less and less like battle resers. And so you are having to utilize that engineering battle res more and more. And it allows you to play with compositions that have that. Then once like you start pushing into later seasons, obviously you're getting less and less just B-res options, specifically in like Shadowlands and stuff like that. You were some seasons just not running any B-res, and you were just relying on external battle res like from engineering, and it was fine most of the time. Even if you look at like Great Push Season 2, a lot of these teams ran no B-res comps. I mean, if you look at this team's playing double Paladin. This is a no B-res comp for a lot of their dungeons. Echo Guardians, I mean, for their time trials and stuff like that. Let's see what they were playing. They're playing Bear Druid. I mean, Bear Druid was good in BFA Season 2, so it's like not every group was playing with a Bear Druid though. And so like, I mean, I know that Astra was playing with a prop Pally fairly regularly. That also ran no battle res comps. But my point is like, once the engineering battle res was introduced, this allowed the opportunity for more diverse compositions in regards to what you're playing, whether or not you are or are not playing a battle res composition. That was based on class balance, and that was based on like player skill, and like it was ultimately up to the players with what they thought was going to be the best and what they wanted to play. Engineering battle res still has a major downside of having to be on top of the player, and it's a fairly long cast. It's not as long as it has been previously. Sometimes I think it's been like 6 seconds. Now I think it's a little bit shorter than that as it currently stands. But I mean, now engineering battle res definitely has some pretty distinct drawbacks. I think all of this is great. I think it makes sense with how the iterative process for battle res has worked, where it's like it went through a process where it was like way too good, so Blizzard tried to nerf back battle res classes to where they weren't just going to be dominating the meta, and then over time that kind of culled that into a point where you are playing battle reses whenever the classes are good, and if you need, or if you want rather, to not play them, you don't have to. And I think that makes a lot of sense. Now let's talk about Bloodlust, because this is all good, but I think that Bloodlust is something that hasn't been addressed in the same capacity, and honestly has kind of gone back in different ways. During Legion of BFA, groups regularly played without Lust in a meaningful capacity. If you look at like BFA Season 1, for example, sometimes people are playing with Hunter, right? But reality, not everybody is playing with the Lust. Like, this group doesn't have a Lust. This group doesn't have a Lust. Like, I don't want to say a lot of these groups, but some of these groups don't have a Lust. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that actually not an insignificant amount of classes don't have Lust. But this is in a spot where you could get away without playing without a Lust. Now, some of the Lust classes were still good, so you would see people without them. But in general, players were playing without a Lust at sometimes. BFA Season 3 was also another example of that, which looks like it's pretty bad because they have Hunters. So some of these groups are playing with Hunters, so it's not exactly the best indication. But I mean, if you look at this group here, they're not playing with the Lust. If you look at this group here, they're not playing with the Lust. So I mean, it definitely did happen. And I mean, you're seeing multiple runs in the top 20 where groups are playing without Lust. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that sometimes Lust classes are just very good, and so you would still see them. It's not like you were never seeing a Lust class, right? That would be foolish. And even still, Lust did provide a little bit more haste than Drums did at this time, and so Lust did have some advantage. It was pretty common to have Bloodlust specs in the meta, and some non-Bloodlust comps in the meta, depending on players, and honestly, depending on what was good. There are a lot. Generally speaking, there are a lot of mage players in the top end of M+, and so you normally will see like mages be pretty good. On top of that, they have 3 specs, and so like having a major hunter be, represented seems fairly likely in some capacity. Now, the issue came whenever this change occurred. And this change happened coming into Shadowlands, where Drums got nerfed in Shadowlands to 15% haste. Shaman, Hunter, Mage needed for full haste buff. And now we have Evoker, of course, where Lust is currently 30%. Drums were previously 25%, but now have been nerfed down to 15%. And this is still consistent with what we have in Dragonflight. And then after that, basically every single... Oh my gosh, I accidentally clicked the wrong thing. Then basically every single season after that, we have had a Lust class in the meta in one form or the other. Whether it be DPS, whether it be healers, it just kind of depends, right? Where it was Mages the first season of Shadowlands, it was Hunters the third season of Shadowlands, and now we're starting to see it again. And for another season, you were effectively forced in some capacity to play with the Lust class, even in other situations you would prefer to play with something else. And so, I mean, this is happening again. And look at the diversity of Lust classes here. So since there is no clear-cut best Lust class, and this is actually impacting the ability to be able to play other healers in some capacity, because not all DPS bring Lust. And so you're seeing that not everybody agrees that one of the Lust-bringing healers, which is the Preservation Evoker, is the best healer. And so in order to supplement that, you're seeing people have to play that Preservation Evoker because they don't want to play with like a Lust DPS, right? Some people think that the Lust DPS are a slightly better alternative than, or like you think that like Evoker and the Lust DPS are also good, which is also an acceptable solution. But the fact that there is no answer right now for this. And you're seeing people be forced to bring Lust in different capacities in every single group right now. And a lot of the questions that we had during the beta and we were asking people is like, okay, so where are you going to be getting your Lust from? Do you think you're going to be getting the Lust from the Preservation Evoker? Do you think you're going to be getting the Lust from like a Mage or an Enhancement Shaman? But never was it on the table, oh, we think that this is going to be our best composition. We're able to forego having Bloodlust and we're going to play Drums. And so that comes in and calls into question, how strong is Lust compared to Drums? And I think that at a higher end, Lust is significantly better than Drums. And this is specifically for high-end players. It's significantly better than Drums at getting you over the line at pain points steering the key. It probably isn't too much than any other just like specific class buff in isolation, but it's concentrated into a 40-second haste gain, and it allows you to get over the most difficult points of the key that you otherwise would be facing. And this is significantly superior for high-end keys whenever things like major trash pulls or very specific bosses are going to be like hindrances and strong pain points just in the key as a whole. I think Lust, similar to B-Res, should be more accessible for compositions to help increase diversity, because over tiers, it's something that should be around to help increase diversity. It's kind of promoted a culture of like re-rolling to the best Lust class for multiple seasons. Now you would say that, okay, it's definitely not hurting diversity because we're seeing some of the things be pushed into the meta, but in reality, it's not like we're going to see things that are stacked in multiples of 3s. That really doesn't happen all too often. You want diversity in terms of like utility and buffs of some capacity, the ability to be able to like displacements on knocks of mobs, you want like interrupts and stuff like that. So you do want diversity in dungeon compositions as it currently stands. But with how Lust is situated, you're forced to bring 1 out of 5. Actually, you only have 1 out of 4 slots because no tank class can even have battle res. So 1 out of your 4 slots of either 3 of the DPS or 1 of the healer slots has to be able to bring that Bloodlust in some capacity. And so that's ultimately going to be a hindrance and an annoyance to just filling out dungeon compositions moving into the future. And I think that Blizzard should look, and I think that drums should be worse than Bloodlust innately. I do think that having drums be 5% worse haste, where that Bloodlust bringer does feel like they're bringing something. They're bringing a little bit more damage whenever they press that lust. That is important. But I think that not leaving these compositions or players that want to play with like groups of people that don't involve a Bloodlust class, or forcing you to re-roll to a Bloodlust class every single season, to where you have all of these healers re-rolling to this in a season that in some capacity players do not agree that Preservation Evoker is the best healer, or because you have multiple healers displaying results that is not true, that Preservation Evoker is the best healer. Now, Preservation Evoker may be the best healer, but we'll never know, because there is this argument of, are they here because they're the best healer, or are they here because Lust is mandatory? And I think that Lust being mandatory is not great, and I think that Bloodlust being mandatory for 5-man content is not great for the metagame and should be looked to be changed. And hopefully that is being changed by increasing drums. I'm interested in hearing your thoughts and opinions, and I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.